So I thought I would revisit growing watermelons in my square foot garden. And so I did this last year since I had a new square foot garden. I had a lot of sun, which is what watermelons need. And I wanted to share with you how you can get watermelons up and growing in your square foot garden too. So first you need to decide, do you want to plant them outside directly into your soil, which is called the direct sow method, or you can start them indoors about 2 weeks before your last frost date. Personally, I prefer to use the direct sow method, and so we will need to use 2 squares for watermelons. So I like to use little skewers to measure off my squares since they are 12 inches long, and I don't use the grid, but I did when I first started using the square foot garden method. And now I just want to make sure my soil is nice and loose, and I always like to amend my soil a little bit in the early spring and summer with a little bit more vermiculite, peat, and compost, and this just helps retain the water in the soil and keeps it nice through the hot summer sun. And by the way, that is not in your book, but that's what I like to do. And I'll add about a tablespoon of some organic tomato food, which is just like a vegetable food that works great for watermelons. And just smooth it out real good here. And now we can plant our watermelon seeds. I soaked these in a little bit of warm water about 30 minutes before I headed out to the garden, and now I want to put 2 seeds here just to ensure germination, and I'll take out the weak ones. So I'll let them grow probably about 2 weeks before I decide which one I want to keep. So we want 1 vine per 2 squares, okay? And give it a marker so I don't go back and plant something else there. And now with a little bit of sun-warmed water that I keep in the center of the garden, I'll go ahead and water them in. And about 2 weeks later, they were up and growing. Both of them germinated, and these are just the little sugar baby watermelons. I really like those. They're nice and sweet. But typically, it should take about 4 to 10 days for your watermelons to germinate. It just so happens that my soil temperature wasn't at the sweet spot for germination, and we'll go over that here in just a minute. So one time I wanted to grow some watermelons in a sandy soil. It was not square foot garden soil, and I thought I should probably start it indoors. It grew great because I did start it indoors to give it a little jump start. Sometimes my seeds don't do too well at a place where I call the river garden, so I like to start a lot of those seeds indoors. So how I do it is I just take a plastic cup with a little iron that I think I got this at Harbor Freight, and I think you can get them on Amazon too. I'll melt some holes in the cup, and then I'll take another cup that does not have holes in it and put a couple of rocks there, and then put the holy cup right there on top and filled it up with some nice seed starting mix. I don't reuse my potting soil, and I make my own seed starting mix, and I'll leave a link to that if you missed that before in the past. And then just in a cup, I want to use 2 seeds again to ensure germination. I'm going about a 1/4 inch deep to a 1/2 inch deep. You don't want to go too deep because sometimes it will rot the seed before it gets a chance to germinate. So no more than a 1/2 inch. And just mist the top here after the soil has been moistened really good, and put a lid on it along with a marker. And I just like to put some kind of cover on it so that it will hold in that moisture and get that seed up and germinating. If you don't have a lid, just use some cling wrap with a rubber band and then wait for them to sprout. And I like to put mine on my windowsill because it's usually nice and warm. And then once they've germinated, I'll just move them outside on sunny days, but I have to make sure to bring them indoors because they will die if a frost happens to hit and I've left it out overnight. So don't leave them outside until after your last frost date. Now, if you don't know your frost dates, I'll leave a link below the video so that you can check that out. That's very important when you're growing watermelon, which is a frost sensitive plant. Now let's take a look at growing temperatures for watermelon. As I mentioned a little while ago, my soil temperature had not hit what I call the sweet spot for germination when I planted it outside, and that varies every year. Sometimes you might have an early summer come along, or it might get hot a lot later. So the soil temperature for germination for watermelon seeds should be between about 65 degrees Fahrenheit and 75 degrees Fahrenheit. And once it's consistently around that temperature most of the day, then you'll notice those seeds will pop up. Just because your watermelons have germinated, don't expect them to just start taking off and growing real fast all of a sudden. What you want to do is just watch the temperatures, and once that temperature has risen to about between 70 and 85 degrees Fahrenheit, you'll start to notice that your watermelon vine will take off. Your day temperatures around that time will be anywhere between 70 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and at night the air temperature will be around anywhere from 60 to 70. And that's when you'll start to notice it'll take off. Just make sure you keep it watered about an inch a week, and when it starts to get fruit, you'll want to water it a lot more, maybe 2 inches a week, and water it at the root, and don't water the vine. The first time I grew watermelons was in my square foot garden back in around 2008, I think it was. And they grew great. I had planted so many different things, I didn't know when to harvest it. I certainly did not have time to look it up. My kids were much younger. So that's what I wanted to make sure to cover with you guys so that you'll know when to harvest your watermelons once they have produced. There's just a couple of things you'll need to look for so you'll know when to harvest it. I did not mention that I typically just let my watermelon vine grow along the bed. Now you'll notice in my first garden it was inside my bed, and now I plant them on the edge of the bed and let them grow outside into the walkway. That works very well for me, but it might not for you. My walkways are real wide, about 4 feet wide. But if you don't have that much space, you can certainly use a trellis, and you'll want to grow them up the trellis and then make a sling, which unfortunately I do not have an example of that, but just use like some old bed sheet and tie it onto the trellis and put the weight of the watermelon in there so it doesn't fall off the vine as it's growing. So you'll need to help give it some support if you're trellising it, but it's in your book. All of you, if you're watching this video, if you have a square foot garden, you're probably following the book, so just follow the guidelines in there for that. So a couple of things you want to look for is the tendrils, which are those little wiry things that come off of the vine. They're usually always bright green and fresh looking. They'll start to dry up and turn brown. This should start to happen about 80 to 100 days after it started growing, and then you can take a look at your watermelon, and at this time it should be fine to go ahead and harvest. Check the bottom first though to make sure that it's nice and yellow. Unlike I'm doing here, I went ahead and clipped it off, but it will be probably bright yellow on bottom, and it'll sound kind of hollow when you thump it. So that'll let you know that it's ready, and hopefully at that time you'll also have a lot of nice green beans and tomatoes and all these wonderful vegetables that we so enjoy in the summer. I chilled mine overnight in the refrigerator. These little sugar baby watermelons are just perfect for sticking in the fridge, and it made a nice wonderful afternoon snack, and they are so sweet. So I hope you guys can give it a try. I hope you have as much luck as I've had over the years growing them, and thanks so much for watching. Y'all have a beautiful day.